Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Commonsense Conversations with the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Back by popular demand once again, I'm joined today by my colleagues Dylan and Stephanie. As a reminder, Dylan is our Political and Government Affairs Manager, and Stephanie is our PAC Director. And today we're going to have a brief recap of last week's primary elections. We'll cover some of the top line results, share any surprises, and also what we'll be watching for in the general election as it takes shape. So thank you, Steph and Dylan, both for being here.
Thanks, Renee.
Hi.
So I wanted to start by taking a page out of our candidate forum books by getting things going with a flash round. So these won't be yes or no questions, but I want you to answer in 1 or 2 words if possible. I promise we'll elaborate on them afterwards. So overall, were you surprised or not surprised by the primary results? Let's start with you, Steph.
Not surprised.
Dylan?
Same. I think there's pockets, and we'll get to that later, where there were some interesting results, but overall, pretty much what we expected.
All right. Most noteworthy race, 1 or 2 words. Dylan?
I'm looking at that city attorney race and trying to glean anything I can learn from it right now. A little bit in shock, but going to be interesting and lots to learn there too.
That was not 1 or 2 words, but we'll go with it. Steph, 1 or 2 words.
I'm just going to, in general, say like South Seattle, South King County races.
Awesome. And do you prefer mail in your ballot or to bring it to a drop box? Dylan?
I'm a Dropbox guy. Something satisfying about making a little bit of a journey over there. I also live like 400 feet from a Dropbox, so I don't have an excuse.
Awesome. Steph?
Vote by mail. We have the best system ever.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being such good sports. So let's dig in a little bit more. And Steph, I want to start with you. Why don't you just start by giving us your overall impression of the primary results and what stood out to you most?
Sure. I mean, I think voters continue to prove that community safety is really top of mind, and that they want candidates who have sort of a more comprehensive understanding of what that means, one that goes beyond sort of the just law enforcement approach, but really gets at the root causes of violence. We have so many candidates this year who won their primaries, who are going on to the general, who really have sort of whole system approaches to community resilience and safety. And I'm not just saying that because we have so many candidates who are running on gun responsibility and advancing to the general, though that's true. And gun violence prevention, we know, is a winning issue from public opinion research. But I also think you can see the intersection of gun violence with a lot of the other issues that voters sort of self-report in these public polls as prioritizing, everything from housing, economic security to the pandemic. The pandemic conditions have resulted in a lot more gun violence in our communities this year. And the primary happened in the midst of an especially tragic spate of gun violence in King County. I think voters here want leaders who will follow through on their promises to build safer and more just communities in the aftermath of everything we've been through in the last year or so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Steph. And right now, with 53 endorsed candidates advancing to the general election, I think it really speaks to what voters want and to the strength of the candidates running this year and to their ability to really understand and address the complexities around violence in general and definitely gun violence. So, Dylan, what about you? What were your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree on all points with Steph and what you just said, Renee. I think it's clear the results show that people are looking for standout, courageous leadership that ensures that people are feeling safe and indeed are safe in their communities, and that they're looking for leaders with plans that go beyond policing to address the root causes of gun violence rather than pointing at policing metrics as their top line. So in King County, we've seen a grassroots support for community violence intervention programs, particularly in the last year. And we've seen more candidates than ever run on a platform that included support for those programs. And many of those vocal community leaders win. And again, we saw that gun violence is, again, a winning issue, not just at the state level or national level, but at the local level. In several places around the state, our alliance endorsed challengers beat their incumbents, not just west of the mountains, but all over the state, proving what we've been saying for years and what the data shows us, that gun violence prevention is and will continue to be a winning issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad, Dylan, that you drew out the support for community violence intervention programs and groups. I think it's really a promising trend within the gun violence prevention movement and evidence of how far we've come to really continue to challenge ourselves to ensure that we're centering the people who are impacted most and relying on them for the answers that they know they need in their communities. 6 years ago, we were fighting to get anyone to run on gun violence prevention in general. And now we have candidates all across the state vocally supporting strategies that we know work to break cycles of violence, in addition to passing smart, common sense gun laws. So I want to give you each a chance now to call out any specific notable races. Steph, we'll go back to you.
Sure. And just to follow up on your last comment, because it made me think about the fact that this cycle is maybe the only one I can remember where we have several candidates who are actual gun violence interrupters, like they either work for or with community violence interruption programs. And that's a shift and a pretty cool one, in my opinion. But notable races, I have to mention the Seattle mayor's race. It's a unique race for us because we've had so many strong candidates, which actually led us to create first ever alliance approved candidate seal of approval. And we came up with that because we take our endorsements really seriously. We want to honor the significant experience that many of the candidates running for mayor had on this issue, but also wanted to help voters understand the key differences between them. So we came up with 10 criteria that we were judging the candidates on and looking at seriously, and just made that totally transparent to voters and to the candidates. This is what we're looking for from you, and where you fall short. And most of the leading candidates did pretty well against our rubric. And I think 4 in the primary ended up receiving our approved candidate seal, and 2 of those are now going on to the general. I also wanted to highlight some smaller races that I'm particularly excited about, and I sort of alluded to earlier, which is there's Irez Guzman, a social worker in SeaTac. She's running for Seattle City Council. This is one of these races where she beat the incumbent in her primary performance. Carmen Rivera did the same thing in her Renton City Council race. She's an educator. She's a community advocate. She was my favorite interview in the primary season. And then Sarah Perry is a candidate who's been working really, really hard all cycle. And she was able to keep incumbent King County Council member Kathy Lambert at 42%. And given our work with King County, I think it'll be really meaningful flip if Sarah continues her trajectory in the general.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Those are really good ones to call out. And I think, speaking of some of these smaller quote unquote races, I think it's really important that we highlight that, which I think our endorsement process does, that at every level of government, gun violence prevention issues are at play. And there are things, even in a state with strict preemption, that can be done and have to be done at every level. And I think that we've seen that continue to grow with a great slate of endorsed candidates. So Dylan, what about you? Any that you'd like to call out specifically?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think, in addition to what Steph mentioned about our strategy with the Seattle mayor's race, we issued a rare dual endorsement in the citywide position 9 on Seattle City Council, because in that race as well, voters had a good choice between 2 strong candidates with significant ties to the gun violence prevention movement. So we found ourselves over and over again in some of these rarefied circumstances where, people are really talking about gun violence prevention in their policy platforms. One of those endorsed candidates in the citywide city council race, Nikita Oliver, is advancing to the general. We're really excited about that. But then there's other exciting places all over the state. Barbara Del Mar in Ellensburg, Don Schwab in Everett, Dante Payne in Olympia at the city council level. It just shows that, gun violence prevention doesn't just win in Seattle and King County. It wins all over the place, right? So lots to follow.
Thanks, Dylan. And definitely really exciting candidates all over the state this year. Okay, before we go, let's turn our sights to the general election coming up. Steph, what will you be watching for in the months between now and November?
I'm definitely going to be watching turnout. Because we have vote by mail, we can really see those trajectories start to build. And we had low turnout. We have really low turnout this primary season. And so I'm hoping for a boost in turnout. We expect younger, more progressive voters in general elections. And I think we really want those people to show up and help push our gun responsibility candidates across the finish line, especially the ones who are in tight races. I also think we really need to pay attention for our organization to how public safety gets litigated. We know that to prevent sort of future crime and violence, we really need to be looking at those root causes that we mentioned above, and some of the programs that are based and rooted in community to be successful. And lots of voters in lots of jurisdictions across our state are going to have a clear choice. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. Maybe it happened in the 80s, but I was pretty little then. But voters are going to have a really clear choice between sort of candidates who have really conventional thinking that rely on sort of heavy police presence and candidates who have a more holistic and grounded worldview when it comes to sort of creating community and violence prevention. So I think that's what I'll be watching closely, how those narratives get told, and then ultimately where voters land in their views.
Thanks, Steph. That's, really, really will be very interesting to see how this all plays out. Dylan, same question to you.
I think a quick two-part answer. Number one, just that our slate of endorsed candidates are, for lack of a better term, sticking to their guns on gun violence prevention as they move into the general, typically, and not so much in the local races maybe, but we worry that some candidates might feel the pressure to play to the middle, and we really want them to stay on gun violence prevention as we keep demonstrating. It's a bipartisan winning issue, and I think communicating with those campaigns as best we can to make sure that they're aware of that. The data suggests that. As well as I'm taking a good look at a lot of the school board races around the state and city council races around the state for a variety of sort of the future of gun violence policy implementation, especially the dedication of ARPA funds to community violence intervention programs to sort of patch up the wounds and try to get out ahead of the community violence that we're seeing at the end of a gun. So lots to check out, lots to follow in that sphere.
Thanks, Dylan. And really, thank you both. There is so much to look forward to and a lot of work to do between now and November. And all of you watching can find out how to get involved in our election work at gunresponsibility.org/get involved. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Common Sense Conversations. And until next time, we'll see you soon.